and welcome back to the Book and Life podcast. Today we're going to have a brand new book guest on. Whether they're an author, an editor, a producer, you'll never quite know, so you're in for one hell of a ride. But today I just have to do the adverts and then I'll get us straight into that most important conversation. And as we do every week, I'm going to read The Shadow, which is part of the Time Guardian series, and this is book 4 from Marianne Curley. The battle is over, the war is won. The prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan, struggling to cope with tragic loss. At odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping in shadows and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess Athena's death, Giselle swears revenge to vilify the immortals' plan for world domination. But Giselle hadn't planned on love, and that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the guard and the order battle through the past and into an impossible future, darkness lurks round every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend or foe who stands in the shadow? And just a reminder that The Price of Freedom by Rosemary Rowan, is being donated to the Ukraine refugee crisis. And here's the blurb for her book. It's one of her Roman British crime series, which was written under her maiden name. All editions can be found online where all books are sold, even her agents donating her commission. Sorry, I don't have the blurb for that, but that's what she's doing. And now, without further ado, let's get you to the guests. And welcome back to the Book and Life podcast, guys. I have a ravenous reader and writer who's joining us today. She's an incredible author with an incredible catalog of stuff, and I can't wait to share her story with you guys. So without further ado, let's welcome Susan Payne.
Hi, everybody.
Did I get that right? Your last name right?
Yes, Payne.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. No, I always worrying that I don't, pronounce it properly. So,
Well, mine's easy. English pronunciation.
Mine's supposed to be easy. Yeah. Mine's supposed to be easy, but people get it wrong all the time too. So it's so yeah, tell us about your book or books, whichever ones you want to plug today.
Well, I have been writing mostly for DSP, which is a firm that publishes mostly Westerns.
Yes.
And they do a lot of the books that kind of maybe your grandparents read. I was brought in under their Magnolia line, Magnolia Blossom line, which was romance. And so they wanted a little more romance besides the, to go along with all the Western part.
Yeah.
And, great. And so we decided that my writing was a little bit of both. And I got moved from the Magnolia line up to the DSP line, which had more story to it. Usually romances are basically centered on the romance only. And I always had a story that went along with mine as far as the rest of the person's life. The backstory. My theory is that love doesn't happen in a vacuum. It would be nice if we could just see that one person we were attracted to from across the room and focus on them. But that's not how it works. And so there's always draws. You have either jobs or family duties, or in modern days you have the transportation of everything between things. So it's
Yeah.
not the knit community that they used to live in. So I write mostly in the 1870s, 1880s. So if you lived in a town, you knew pretty much everyone around you. If you lived out on the farm, then you were really, more cut off, but you always went to the town for churches and to get your
Dances and
your
stuff. Yeah.
provisions. So those became your two spots,
Yeah.
and there it wasn't, there wasn't any way to learn about anything else. So in some ways we think of them as being backwards, but they weren't necessarily backwards, but they were limited. If we just
Yeah.
took ourselves away from television and telephones, especially, and the internet and newspapers, we wouldn't know much besides what was immediately around us.
Yeah.
So that's how my characters come from that background. So my characters can't have knowledge of anything besides what I felt that their life was at the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but
I
I've been
I
very
think
happy with the.
your work does so much, like there's so much detail to it because I have had a chance to see some of it, and there is a great deal of detail. And I think I love the fact that you put backstory in, because I was always a writer that fought for backstory in my own novels and my own romance stuff, and I think it adds value to it. And the fact that you're able to do that in a historical setting where there's not so many sort of feeders of different distractions for people, and it is very focused on family, church, provisions, taking care of everybody, is incredible. And I think what you've put together is something remarkable.
Well, thank you. It's my kids sometimes think I lived in that era. They think, wow, when mother was little, she got in the horse and buggy and
I think they all do that. Yeah, yeah. Kids are really good for that, making you feel older than you are. Yeah, I totally follow you on that one.
yeah, I'm, and the thing is, I think I was born at the most perfect time because my aunts that I was raised with, my mother was very close to her mother and her mother's sisters. So I was raised by women who were born in 1870, and
Yeah,
that carried over. They lived to be quite elderly, and the things they said, the things they taught me, comes from what they learned and what their mother taught
yeah.
them, and so
Tradition. Yeah,
yes, and it's just the way things were back then. You worked hard. Uh, there was no such things as vacations. Farmers
no,
didn't take vacations.
no. Farmers still don't. There's a lot of farmers that don't. So I totally get that. I grew up in a fishing village. Um, I was lucky because both mom and dad worked. My dad worked in the fishing industry. He sold insurance and was a debt collector. And my mom was a chef. So my grandfather kind of raised me, and he was very much of the same mind frame of whatever, the tradition was in the island, you sort of passed down. And I got it from, like, I had so many family around me that I just constantly was getting educated on sewing and knitting and fishing and smuggling and how to trade with people and how to, loyalty was a huge thing in our family and trust was a huge thing in our family. And that was really, really installed in me. And I think grandparents and great aunts and aunts, they all play a huge role in how we raise our kids. And that was certainly the case with me because if I was sick, I got passed off to the grandparents so mom could go to work and dad could go to work. And so I ended up spending most of my life with them. And where I grew up, the internet was not a thing till like much later on. Mobile phones was not a big thing. So if we wanted to talk to each other, we had to go to each other's houses, and we knew where everybody lived, and we all kind of knew each other's parents and all that kind of stuff. So we were a bit kind of sheltered in that regard, because it was like, I would say it's like the olden days where, we still had payphones right up to like 2006, which some of us still used. Um, I say that and everybody will be like, what the hell's a payphone? But that was just, you had to memorize people's phone numbers, because 9 out of 10, you were not, you'd need to phone somebody if you got stranded somewhere. And the payphone usually was your only option.
Yeah, and I my stories are usually about ordinary people. I mean, it's easy
Yeah,
to write about kings and queens and
of course. Yeah,
famous famous people because there's so much information about them out there that you can study.
of
Um,
course.
and it always sounds so wonderful, their life.
Yeah,
But when you get the nits and gritty and you go, well, they had to have people that pick the fleas off their furs before they put them on, or, the lice out of their hair, uh, shaved their head so that they, and then wore wigs. I mean, you go back far enough, life wasn't so pretty.
no, it
There's
wasn't.
no, and then I have written not necessarily about those things, but I've written of that time period, and um, their food wasn't that grand. Their choices were limited. Um, Canned
Yeah,
food
whatever
and
you got
candy.
given, you had to eat, was essentially what we had. So I can totally understand that.
Yeah, it's what was, whatever got trapped that day or whatever. you know. Uh, there
Whatever
wasn't
fish
any.
they caught, yeah.
Yeah, if they had some salted fish for to keep them over for for periods of time when they couldn't get, yeah, then that's what they had. But there was times when food became scarce,
Yeah,
and it was an issue of eating your field seed for the next spring or not making it through the winter. So you eat your seed. There's still
yeah.
countries
It
that
was,
have to make that decision.
yeah, and we look at the farming system nowadays, and there's a lot of farms that are going under, and it's making everything so expensive because there's lack of competition now. There's lack of, resources and things like that. And I think that's almost lost in our society now. So that's why I like fiction novels that just remind us about why farmers are important, why fishermen is important, why knowing that these resources need to be kept going is important. There's more to life than just going to the supermarket and getting your groceries. Somebody's probably raised that piece of beef you're eating, fed it, calved it, done everything with it. And then, they've probably even driven it to get slaughtered. So I think it's really important to have historical novels in our today's life, because it helps to drive home a reminder of where we came from and what we need to not forget.
But it does drive you back to the basics.
Yeah,
Self entertainment as far as singing and playing a guitar and uh, uh,
telling
writing
stories.
poetry and things that they could do when it became dark outside, and and they had to just the same family members within the home that's always there. Um, they always like too many of the stories of the books would write about all these these parties and things, but that's like Regency London, but that was a very small group of people that lived that way. The
Yeah,
rest of them did not live that way. Someone had to be the person who washed those dance slippers and who cleaned up after them, and you know
yeah.
it's I
It,
like
it's
writing.
funny it's funny you say that, because one of my writing idols growing up was Catherine Cookson. And Catherine Cookson wrote about the everyday working person. So she talked about being a maid in a house. She talked because that's how she started. She started off as a maid, and she was in the cleaning service, and she wrote at night. That was her entertainment. That was how she coped with it. And she talked about racism and disability inequality and female inequality in her books, but she did it from the point of view of the everyday Joe rather than it being about famous or whatever. She really did focus on what is it that we live with every day and what is it that, makes our stories important. And I think her voice is so unique and important to the historical fiction world because she was one of the very first to do any of that.
Hmm.
Have you heard of her?
No, I haven't. That's why I'm making mental note.
I mean, she was amazing. Because when I first started reading, I was dyslexic, and when I picked up her works, I realized she was dyslexic too because my brain was automatically filling in the difference, or like where the grammar should be was going in my head. And she writes like somebody would talk to you. So you could tell that a lot of her books was dictation and that somebody had dictated her books down on paper for her. And I think she has such an amazing story because she was dyslexic. She had a rare blood disorder. She couldn't have a family. Her books became entirely her life because she couldn't have what was considered a normal life, And I think I just find her really fascinating. And when I get other sort of historical writers on, I love to talk about her and share her with people because she's kind of fading away now. The generations now have no idea about her, and I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I've read. I don't know. You read the book and it almost reads as if it's a diary or
Yeah,
that the person it was of that the person. I like to read those kind of things, even if it's not truly their life. Usually they tell us about things that we wouldn't think about or know about. Like I said, I had my aunts, and they were, which actually were great aunts, and they were just kind of typical with a little bit of help along the way. I mean, I was too young to have boyfriends or
yeah,
anything yet, but I remember they got into a conversation about when they had beaux uh, in their earlier life, and it was just interesting what they thought was important and what they did. And
yeah,
part of it was they only had one dress. Literally, they had
hmm,
one dress. They wore an apron over it to protect it. But then to make it look like a new dress, they would change the ribbon or add lace collar or a tatted collar or something. And then that was their new summer dress. But
yeah,
it it kind of boggles the mind for us in this day and age to think of a child only having one set of clothing or God forbid, one pair of
yeah,
shoes. Uh, just things like that. But it was normal for them. And I think back, I don't think they had a lot of clothes even when I knew them. Now they were in their probably 80s at that time. But, I think I remember my grandmother wearing this button apron. She put it over her head and buttoned it at the waist. And
yep,
it pretty much covered everything. And that was what I always remember her wearing. And my father's parents were farmers, although his father had a job in a manufacturing company also, just to make ends meet. But
yeah,
they farmed 40 acres in their quote spare time unquote. It was
yeah,
it was something that I learned from that you get up, you start working, and you do not stop. for anything.
Yeah, I remember those days as well. Yeah, because even growing up as I didn't maybe have it as rough as that, but I understood that we would get up in the morning and there was like a set routine. Like we had a set number of things we had to get done in that day. And that was very much driven into my mind by my grandmother. And I think that's where my work ethic comes from when it comes to writing is get up, get it done, stop your moaning, stop your complaining, just get on with it. And I think that's a really good thing to install in people because it gives you drive, it gives you ambition, and it gives you a lot of the resources you need to make it work.
Hmm. Well, I found that my couples would come to me as a couple and they would like introduce themselves pretty
Yeah.
much and they would tell me a little bit about their story and I became more of a stenographer than a
Oh,
writer.
okay. Yeah.
And so I was trying to keep up with what they were telling me, how they were speaking to one another, what they were saying, and also how they were saying it. And at the
Yeah.
same time, putting a little bit of where they were and what they were wearing. And, but the majority of my, focus was they were just sometimes talking over themselves. So I was very busy putting books together, and that hasn't stopped yet. It might eventually. I figured that okay, eventually everybody's going to have their story told there, and I'm going to sit here in my chair alone. But
That
I
never
found that
happens. I can
no,
hold my hand up and say it never happens. It doesn't happen. You will be
okay,
writing on your
well,
deathbed, you know?
that's, yeah, there'll be still people saying, "Wait, I've got one more story to tell you."
And you'll
Um,
be like, no, I can't. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done.
Come on,
I
there's
mean, I know
someone
what
else.
it's,
Sorry.
I know what it's like because I've been, like, I have arthritis, so I get super ill sometimes. And there's nothing worse than lying in a hospital because you don't get any peace in hospital. And I think that's a misconception everyone has. But you're lying there, and 9 out of 10, I'll have a character standing next to my ear, wittering about some story they want me to get off my lazy backside and write. And I've seen me, with like IVs in my arms and barely able to open my eyes or whatever, and my hands will be going across the keyboard, just putting down that story that they're telling me. And if I don't get any rest. I've never been able to switch my mind off. I've never been able to not think about the next story or the next step or the next chapter. It's always there. It's always on the go. And I feel grateful for it, but at the same time, it does feel like a curse. So at least you
Well,
understand my pain on this score.
yeah. Well, and I'm also dyslexic, so
So we're
and all
definitely
my
sisters in arms on this one. Yeah.
yes, and my children all are, and some were diagnosed with ADD also, which
Yeah,
I
that's
always
awful. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure I was as a child just because I was always going, but I've settled down as a matron, and
Yeah.
I love children with ADD because they are so fascinating. They come up with ideas
They are.
that
Yeah.
maybe I wouldn't have thought to do or you know watch or whatever it was. It's like when my third child was, I think she was about maybe 9, 10 months old. She was by my sliding glass door, and an ant had come in, and she's watching it, and she's trying to pick it up with her little
Right.
fingers, and of course the ant faster. Babies move, and by the time she got there, the ant was no longer there, and so she's trying to pick it up, and I wanted her to be able to try to pick it up, but I also wanted to be close enough that if she picked it up, she would pop it in her mouth before I
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
her.
I was thinking that. Yeah.
So but that's what
It
I
wouldn't have harmed her if she had it. It wouldn't have done her any
no,
harm.
they need ants other places. It was just one ant, but still, I
Yep.
wasn't. I was close enough to tell her, "Ock," but it's
Yep.
it was just something that I realized to her. That's a big thing. That ant is, compared to her, was very big, very interesting, and
Yeah.
worth paying attention to. The rest of the world ignored the thing, wouldn't have even
Yeah.
realized it was there. And that's when I
I mean,
realized I'd like really
I
that
love that story that you just told me because I love that story you just told me because I worked with kids with disabilities at a school for a number of years. And I loved the kids that would come in with just ADHD that was just raging, because I could almost take them and just take them to class and I could get them through their class, but I could harness a lot of their energy. And that was what I had to teach them was like, take this energy that you've got that you want to do all these other things with. And I showed them like how to do it and how to do it with the discipline they needed. And I met some amazing kids. I had one kid who was doing physics on a university level and he was only in his first year of high school. And he figured out how to hack things. So we had to keep an eye on him to make sure he wasn't hacking the school because he was bored. It was like things like that. But yeah, if you put him in a room with people, he couldn't cope. He could not be around other people. It just was not something he could cope with. And I just love it when you get kids like that because you just never know what's going to come out of them. And I especially love the kids with autism because my brain was like firing off of theirs. Like it was just such a chemical reaction between how they would behave and then how I would respond. I thought it was amazing. I love kids like that. I could work with kids like that all day long.
Yeah, I did work with kids like that all day long, and I didn't, I wasn't anything that I did intentionally, but I was a scout leader, so I had a lot of little boys.
Oh, wow.
At one time.
That's an undertaking and a half. I give you full 100% credit on that one. I couldn't do that, so I take my hat off to you.
Well, the girls, we had over 20, and,
wow.
and in a group, not a problem. No, girls, the boys, we had 6 to 8, I believe, in a troop. They didn't allow, they didn't like bigger ones than that because, you couldn't.
You can wrangle them as well. Yeah, you can wrangle them as well.
Back into the mass. So, but that's I really enjoyed those years, and and kids who were told, who I was told, oh, they're just completely uncontrollable. It's like, no, they're not. Give them something they will focus on, and that kind of also is where they say, ADD, oh, they can't focus. I always found that they hypo-focused, that
yes,
they really paying attention to you.
Yeah. Every kid, because I was crazy. I did the teaching assistant thing. And then at night, I did youth clubs, and I would take these kids that they completely wrote off in our community, would say, oh, they're ADHD, they're autistic, they cannot socialize with other kids. And I said, give them to me and I will prove you wrong. And I did. I helped these kids integrate into youth club settings where they knew the rules, they learned how to socialize, they learned how to share, they learned how to communicate, and they fitted in. And I actually had one dad walk up to me and he had literally tears in his eyes because he had 3 ADHD highly autistic kids. 3. Not just one, he had 3, and some of them didn't sleep. And he said to me, he's like, thank you. You got my son into this youth club. You got him to socialize, and now he is actually starting to teach his brother how to do it. And just by me taking the time to sort of hand over to the other youth leaders, because I was head youth leader, but handing over and saying, look, you, Nikki, can go talk, you, Nikki, go do that. I'll work with him. And I slowly got it so that he would work with the other kids. But he had that support, and it made him feel safe. He wasn't bullied. He wasn't ostracized. I got it to work. But without people that know what they're doing to help kids in these situations, it just doesn't work. And I've worked with adults with ADHD, and some of the most amazing writers I've ever met in my life are dyslexic and have ADHD. And if I just slow it down with them and I listen to them and I don't argue every point with them and I hear through what they're saying, it's easier to work with them because I understand how their brain's firing compared to how my brain's firing, and I can get that kind of common ground in the work done. I admire anybody that takes anything like that on. So you've completely taken my hat off my head and has walked home with it, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it seems like an age ago, but I do it all over the same. I didn't, I enjoyed children. I enjoy people watching more than participating.
Yeah.
So I'm the one who goes to the bar, sits in the back corner, facing outward, and and watching
I've
the
done that.
interaction.
Yeah. It's weird.
I found that I did it all the time.
I find this, and this is no, obviously, but I find that every author I've had on this podcast is a year old, and every author I've had on it, we all say the same thing. We people watch. It's like a really bad habit, but we all, if we're in a coffee shop, if we're in a restaurant, it doesn't matter where we are, but we start to notice certain people in the room and we follow those people. And that ends up kind of inspiring things inside us, and it helps with the writing. But it's really bad as well because you're kind of aware that you're watching these people, and then you're kind of like trying to cover up the fact you're watching them. But yeah, my mother is actually the reason I started people watching, because I couldn't do a lot as a kid. I had arthritis from 2.5 years old. So my mom would take me to the shopping center or the mall, and we would sit on the top floor, and there was this little cafe area where we could get food, and she would just buy stuff that I could eat, and we would watch the people that were below us. And then me and her would come up with stories about the people we were watching. And I swear, that's how I got started in writing, was just coming up with stories to entertain my mom while we were trying to eat ice cream or whatever it was she was attempting to get me to eat, because I was one of those kids that wouldn't eat anything, and so she was constantly fighting with me. And we did that all the time. It didn't matter where we went, we always did that. And I think all of us just are generally curious about the human psychology and human nature in general.
I just editing a book where two very close friends. The one did not have a mother, so she gravitated to the household full of children, and spent a lot of time with them. But they had a game where they would say something, and in the book it was, "Oh, he just robbed a bank," and the other one would say, "Yes, and he's got some jewels that he found in the safe, in his pocket. Oh, and he's going," so they were like putting together
making stories, yeah.
The story between the two of them, and then they would fall into giggles and laughs because it was so outrageous, and it wasn't anything that.
I think those are the best, though.
But
yeah, like those are the best because you're. I think they're the best because you're collaborating with somebody else, so you're feeding off each other. Like, do you not find that when you're sitting and, because we all do these exercises when we go to romance conventions. So we'll sit in like a round table and we'll come up with like a story and we just feed off each other. I think those are the best because it's just ideas. It's like pure raw creative power that we're sharing with each other. Do you find that when you're doing those exercises?
I am a very more contained, and I think it's because my characters come to me. I'm reading a
Yeah.
story rather than I'm out there trying to find things. I mean, there's a lot of new things out there, snowflakes, theories and tarot cards, and
Yeah.
and I I don't I don't want to say I don't need them. I can't use them because my people
No.
already have their story. And my saying, oh,
I'm the
what
same.
would work well in here is if we bring in a third person, and they look at me going, what you talking about? There's no third person. It's her and me.
Yeah.
And listen to what we're saying, please, but get back on track.
Track.
Um,
Yeah.
and so a lot of times I don't know where it's going. I mean, with the romance, it's always a happy ending, but it's not. There's a lot of things that come into it. I I had a critiquer once tell me, I don't find any chemistry between these two people, and it's the usual. All they wanted was the first like two chapters to read, and I sent it in, and I she said, I don't find any chemistry between these two. I think you need to go back, throw it out, start over. And
That's the
I didn't.
worst feedback. That always is. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't. The problem was it wasn't the couple. The couple wasn't there yet. There was one of the couples. The other one.
Yeah.
What we were saying is how badly, the choice was. So I don't always do a lot of romance. People do is introduce their couple the first chapter. Pretty much stage out who they are, where they are, and everything. By the second chapter, I sometimes when you start my books, the couple isn't there yet. They don't know one another, or if they know one another, they don't know that is going to be the love of their life.
Yeah.
It unfolds. Something causes them to change their viewpoint.
Yeah.
I do a lot of mail order brides because back then you normally wouldn't come into contact with a lot of men, but on a mail
No.
order bride, you have to come into contact with that man. You're married to him. You're in his home.
Yeah.
Your life is his life to pretty much, if he wants to beat you, that's allowed. I mean, if he wants to starve you, it doesn't matter. You basically belong to that man, and you have to kind of acknowledge that in the story, and the woman, the bride, has to acknowledge that fact too. I mean, that it was just a general given that mail order bride wasn't something that you did lightly, or that because divorce was rare to none, and it's it was a life, something that demanded it because you couldn't do anything else to save your life. That was the only way you could figure out to make it in the world.
When I was growing up in Shetland, arranged marriages was something that happened, and it was normal to us. It wasn't until I went to mainland Scotland that I found out that was something that they'd stopped doing 50 years before. So there is still places in the world where that situation still occurs. I wouldn't say I agree with it, but I know it still happens. I know there's still families that breed with other families because they're trying to keep the bloodline a certain way, or they want to keep land, or they want to keep, prestige of whatever within the family units. And I think that's like, I don't hold anybody against doing it, but I've seen the consequences of those relationships, and I've seen how badly they can go. And I think addressing that in your work the way you're doing it is good, because it's just reminding women how far we've come to the point where, this was, when we were back in those times, women didn't have rights. They didn't have voices. They didn't have much about anything. And now look at us. We're running companies, we're running countries, we've taken over. And I think that's really a really positive thing to kind of come out of your work.
Yes, because a lot of times, where with the era that I'm writing, women were not allowed to go have a bank account. They did not go into the bank and get money out of and of their
ATM,
husband's
yeah.
account normally. They couldn't own land. So your husband dies, you have no male relative, and they pretty much give your land to, whoever.
Somebody else. Yeah.
Then supposedly they shall take care of you. But they don't have to. There's no law that says that they can,
and you would get a lot of men that would marry, young women for their land, and then sort of use them up and then throw them aside. That happened a lot. I saw that in the fishing industry where, if somebody's dad and brother had passed on in a fishing accident and the mom was there or the daughter was there, they would marry the daughter or they would marry the mom to get the company or to get the boat or to get, whatever it was that they had left over. And I like sometimes going back and reading those sort of fictions because it reminds me of how far we've come and how different attitudes are. I think it's a good kind of reminder of, hey, yeah, this was how it was, so let's enjoy how it is now,
I wrote a book about a sheriff who got entangled with a suffragette. And of course, every town that he dragged her through, he'd go to sleep. And in the morning, he'd wake up to these drums beating out. And she's standing on a back of a wagon, rallying all the women who've come in for their groceries and things to go home and deny their husband their body and do this and demand this. And he's going, she's going to get herself killed, and so he has to quick race off and save her again and, drag her to another town where she does
it all over again. Yep.
There's too many fires. He just can't put them out. But
I love that. I do. I really love that.
It changed his way of thinking because,
of course.
He was a sensible man, and really it was unsensible the way they treated women. There was one state, I believe it was Wyoming, that gave the women the right to vote early on before anybody else did. Yeah. And they did that to draw the women into the state because they knew if the women came, the men would follow. Yeah. And they would have families, and that would bring their population up so that it was high enough to become a state. And so that's how territories were, why they were giving away the free lands and stuff. But this is just one section, one woman, one man, but that was their story that they told me. And it's, got some humor through it because, he's getting frustrated with her and why can't she just be normal? Why can't she just, settle down and be a woman? And of course, he's very attracted to her. She is lovely and just very opinionated and willing to share that with everybody. So
I love that. I love that story because it's the start of the women changing things. I love that he has to kind of almost realize, oh, I gotta go put this fire. Like, oh no, I gotta go put this. I love that kind of back and forth. And I think that there's humor there as well, which makes it more lighthearted and more enjoyable for readers. So can I ask, what are you reading right now? Because I've seen reports that you read up to 50 books a month. So what is it that you're devouring at the moment? What's sticking out to you at the moment?
Not so much. I try not to write the genre that I'm I mean, I try not to read the genre that I'm writing
Yeah,
because
of
I
course.
don't want it to taint me. Sometimes
Yeah.
if you read someone too much, it will. You can hear his voice come through your work,
Yeah.
accidentally,
Yeah.
type of thing. And so, but I like Gina Conklin. Um, she
Okay.
she she does a little, kind of Viking, but up to Regency. She tends to
Yeah.
do historicals more than anything else. I like.
Have you tried the contemporary stuff? Have you tried contemporary romance or?
I do not care for contemporary romance
Oh, okay.
because I don't think there's as much conflict
Hmm.
in it.
I have a book for you. I in mind actually when I said that. Because I understood the second I started talking to you, this woman loves conflict, and it's so rare that I find readers, particularly authors that are readers, who love conflict and who love to like really sink their teeth into kind of the bigger picture of a story that likes that backstory. So I did a book series, and it's contemporary fiction. So it's not contemporary romance, contemporary fiction. And it's about two sisters, and they turn on each. Well, one turns on the other and releases her diaries to the world. So can you imagine all your diaries suddenly being public domain, right? Every woman's worst nightmare, because we write stuff in there that we really shouldn't write. So Layla does this to her twin Marie because she thinks that she's helping her sister by de-burdening her sister with all these secrets that she's kept for like years. But what she doesn't realize is Marie's had this whole secret life that she's been living that now is coming front and center, and she can't ignore that life anymore. So her estranged husband returns and her brother-in-law returns, and now she's got to deal with these men that she kind of thought were behind her, but now they're front and center in her life again. And at the same time, she's got that kind of anger at her sister for doing what she did, but she also has this need to protect her sister. So you get that really kind of complicated relationship between them, whereas Marie's trying to protect Layla, and Layla's just no clue, just barreling ahead, just totally wreaking devastation everywhere she goes. And then you've got their dad, who has broken the relationship with his daughters by keeping secrets from them. And now they know these secrets, and he's desperately trying to kind of repair that relationship. And to me, it was always about when I wrote that series, and luckily that book's relaunching on 21st of August. I liked the idea of the conflict. I liked building a spider web from giving readers all the different perspectives of all the people that were involved, the main characters that are involved. So the story grows, and the more as the story grows, the more backstory you learn, and the more you get to really feel like you have a connection with these characters. So I think you might enjoy it. I think you would enjoy the conflict, and you might feel sorry for Marie a little bit. I'll have to get your copy sent out. I'll get I'll
well, yeah, I was going to say I'll take the name and of
yeah.
the title of the book and
Because I
get
love
it.
it when you can share recommendations with people. Because, like, for instance, I shared Catherine Cookson with you earlier. But I think as authors, we have to know what's going on in the market. We have to almost be aware of more than just our stories, because obviously marketing plays an issue, and we have to think about that, and we have to think about all these different elements. And I think sharing other people's work in a situation like this, when it's just two people talking, is so important, because we're also expanding the reader's point of view, and we're giving other writers opportunities to get known.
And I read contemporary. I don't write contemporary, and that's
Yeah.
because number one, I don't feel comfortable in that. I've been married for, oh, I don't know, we can't ever remember, something like 56.
I like that. We can't remember. going to steal that line.
Yeah. And before that, we were a couple from the time we were basically 14 years old.
Wow.
So that puts us over 60 years together.
Wow,
And
that's a long time. Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. So we look at one another and go, really? Is this? Yeah. But, it's, so the dating it's been so long. I think that's one of the
Yes.
reasons I don't do contemporary. If I was going to do
I don't blame
contemporary,
you. I don't blame you. If I had a husband for 60 years, I wouldn't want to be writing about dating and all the trauma that comes with that.
well, and the phone's changing, and so you know
Yeah.
how they say, oh, watch what you put in a book, because your book isn't going to be out necessarily immediately.
Yeah.
Especially,
Yeah.
a few years back, it would be you'd write a book and it would be published in a year.
Yeah.
So don't say something about
iPhones or
the
cell
war
phones
unless
or
you know how
yeah.
don't get involved in things, and don't you, technology has left us behind.
Yes.
And so you don't want to get stuck with this great big shoebox of a phone in the guy's hand as he's talking on it, and everybody else now has a little flip phone or one that,
Yeah, tiny
the
thing. Yeah.
smartphone that's giving you not only voice but photos and any information on the internet you want, and will
Yep.
order your groceries and have your dinner delivered, and pretty much do everything besides babysit your child. And some
Yeah.
people use
Well,
it to babysit the
some
child.
people do use it to babysit the children.
That's right. But you know what? It's so and I'm afraid I don't think contemporary romance is as romantic as it should be or
It's
could
not.
be.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
And so when you use women back from the 1800s, they were innocent. They had no idea what sexual love was, say, or
No. Yeah.
and no one to tell them, or bad
Yeah.
advice if they got any advice. So
It's funny you say that. One of the things that we had in Shetland growing up was called the Boon Bride Night. And that was when all the females of the family that were married would get together, and they would all cram into the one house, and they would have this huge meal, and every single one of the women at the table had to tell the bride to be what to expect as a married woman. So there was kind of a little bit that went on from the 1700s in Shetland. So there was this little bit of prep that you got, but it was like the night before, so you couldn't run away. But it was still enough that like most of the women were kind of clued into what they were getting. And I think that's that was history for us, and I think that's really important. I did find out that Scotland had it for a number of years during the sort of 17 and the 1800s, but it died out in the 1900s. But I can safely say in Shetland, they still do the Boon Bride night the night before, which I think is really important because it kind of gives the girl a kind of, okay, this is what you're in for kind of thing. And I think it's very good, especially if you're a young person getting married, because there's a lot of young people that get married in the islands. And yeah, so I think it's really, I'm grateful I got it, because my mother did it for the night before my wedding, even though I'd been with the guy for like 13 years. And we'd lived together for 13 years. She still took me aside on the night before my wedding, her and my aunt, and had a conversation with me. And they were like, yeah, you need to expect this, and you need to expect that, and you need to accept this, and you need to accept this. And I was like, okay, thank you, I think. Bit
yeah.
late.
Are you sure?
I remember my best friend, she turned to me, and she's only done this recently. She turned to me and she said, when your husband carks it and my husband carks it, we'll run away together. This was a plan she had cooked up one day in her head and just says to me randomly as she's driving the car. And I'm like, yeah, why not? You know, this is the kind of stuff that happens to me. So
yeah, you better watch that. She'll help your husband along, when she gets bored with hers.
yeah, I did think of that. I was like, I wonder if she's like scheming to do her husband's in, and I'm just not in on it.
Yeah, you're not thinking along those lines. She's trying to say, hey, we can make this work. I remember.
Yeah, and I'm like, sure.
One of my first books, I had a male that wasn't very experienced, and he was afraid because his wife she was a mail order bride, but she was a widow, and he was afraid that he wasn't gonna, come up to
her standards,
to expectations, and so he had his younger brother who had been off to university, and he had more experience in these things to explain things to him, and and so he's really concentrating on his brother, and of course his brother is thinking, oh my God, I got to help him, but this is so embarrassing to.
But yeah, I mean, can you imagine that conversation though? Because as girls, we've all had that conversation with a best friend, right? I've been that girl where I phoned up my best friend and I was like, hey, so this guy's not like any other guy I've ever been with, advice here. And she literally burst out laughing on the phone with me, and she went, oh, Crystal, oh, you poor thing. And she talked to me, we had a whole conversation about it. Because I'd never been with a guy outside of Shetland before, so I didn't really know what to expect. And so she had to have this conversation with me. And because my mom was not great at those kind of things. And so me and her had this long conversation while I'm on a ferry headed to the mainland, and she's giving me advice over the phone. We've been friends 17 years, so
yeah, I see, and I'm, my experiences are all mental. I have to, with these couples, they have to tell me,
what happens,
what happens, what they're feeling, and whatever. I mean, if I do write a little steamy book, but I just think that passion is part of love, and it happens. Everybody knows it happens, and pretending it doesn't is foolish, and it's often a big part of the chemistry that occurs when all that serotonin and all that dopamine and everything
endorphins,
endorphins are all, I can't get enough smelling of you, it's just, it's all
the pheromones,
they're all going like crazy. And because this, I'm not writing about people who've been married 14 years or, and it's not the same. It's not bad. It's just not the same as it is when you're.
It's funny you said that, because I was always hesitant about writing steamy novels. I always I had a kind of this, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing kind of feeling. And I wrote Summer of Him, which was probably the steamiest thing I ever wrote, because they wanted me to explore that sexual side of the relationship. And so I took an erotica author, which I thought was okay, this will make it a little bit easier for me. I'll take an erotica author and I'll take a fighter and I'll put them together. Surely that'll work. And I just didn't realize just how steamy I had to go to get these two to actually work, because because you can almost think of it in the opposite way of your work, whereas he was very experienced in relations with women, and she was very much in the mindset of, this is what I write for a living. So her expectations were already super high for him. So when I had to do their chemistry, it was almost like they were in competition with each other to see who could have the best reaction from their partner. And I never realized how good that chemistry was until somebody read it and then wrote to me and said, holy crap, Crystal, that chemistry was just off the chain. But I was always iffy about doing them. And then with that book, it's kind of opened that door for me to kind of explore chemistry in a new way.
Yeah, and I don't know where it comes from, because my children, they said they hum through that part of the book when they get to anything. They do not want to.
My friends do the same thing. Yeah, my friends all do the same thing. I actually had to sit one of my friends down and explain to my friend the character in the book wasn't him, and I wasn't the girl. I actually had to explain this to him.
Yeah, this is not a diary. This is not a.
Yeah, I was like, this is not a sexual fantasy that I've had about you. This is a story that came to me, and it just happened that it came to me the same weekend we became friends. Like, it was not predetermined, it's just something that happened. And he laughed at me and he went, no, you really just wrote about me and you. And I was like, no. But still, to this day, he likes to think so.
I didn't know I was that good.
I think it gave him an ego boost. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. He probably has a frame somewhere over his bed going, yeah, that's me.
And I mean, it's weird because, like, I don't feel nervous about giving my work to female friends, because I know, like, they'll come back to me and say, hey, that was the spice I needed for my relationship or whatever. But I gave it to a male friend recently, last couple of years, and he'd actually not read it. He gave it to his girlfriend, and he came back to me about 3-4 days later, and he said, Crystal, he said, whatever you wrote in that book of yours, just you keep doing it, because that worked out great for me. And I was like, so do you tell me you didn't read it? And he's like, nope, but my girlfriend did.
Got the job done.
Yeah, I got the job done. So apparently I've saved some relationships with that one. I'll send you an email with the title of that one so you can have a giggle. But yeah, like, I never thought of my books ever having any kind of impact or anything like that. But now that there's more of it coming out, it's just blows my mind, just utterly blows my mind at the way that people react.
Yeah.
Do you get that kind of reaction?
I don't follow any feedback.
You're like me, you don't read the reviews. You're kind to yourself.
No, because when I was first putting books out there, of course, you send them, I sent them out to contests because you got a critique back. It was guaranteed critique back. And I thought, fine. And they would, and I found that 2 out of 3 would like it. The third one just didn't get it. I mean, they were sometimes off the wall and some of their stuff. And I know part of it is that some people think to critique means you must find a fault, a flaw. Rather,
I've been there. Yeah.
Rather than, accidentally find the flaws and then say, this didn't seem to flow very well, or, like I said, there's times when they go, I didn't find any chemistry. It's like, okay, that's good. I did my job, because these 2 people are going to become brother and sister-in-law. They are not going to become, bedmates.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to meet their partner further into the story. But it's, I'd like to do that because I didn't want a consistent for a while they had formulas that a writer had to stick to. Uh,
Yeah.
you meet in the first chapter. By chapter 16, they have found a irreconcilable differences of some sort, and they've gone their separate way. By chapter 24, they're back and madly in love again. And some of it felt so contrived when you read a book that an author was trying to do that with.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of that now where I think we're moving away from those rules. I think we are starting to turn that corner of romance doesn't have to be set within these set boundaries or these set rules. And I think that's a good thing because I think it should be about the characters. It should be about their story. If it has a very heavy romantic element, great. If it doesn't and it's just about their journey, then what's wrong with just telling their journey? And we can figure out the genre later. You know, I think that's how I address my work now. Is I get an idea, I get a concept of what I want to write, and I run with that idea, and I just tell that story. And then I worry later on, okay, well, how am I going to market this? Where is it going to go? And I I would never have done that if I hadn't listened to fellow writers and I hadn't listened to like my co-author or my friends, because I would have gotten so stuck in the idea of this is the set rules, I have to do it this way, and I can't go outside the lines. And I love it when I get other authors on here that feel the same way. Like, yes, there should be lines, but don't be afraid to cross them.
well, and on the that's why I kind of stepped out of romance, because there was more story to mine.
Yeah.
There isn't a, sometimes it's kind of a little bit of a mystery. Sometimes it's, murder mayhem. I'm going to do one on a clairvoyant coming up.
Wow.
A little sci-fi, but I believe clairvoyants are real. That there are people who,
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
whatever it is, a little deja vu, a little. Wait a minute, did I just see something float across my room? So I believe in that, and my family has very strong connections to
Yeah.
things that maybe are in the past or in the future.
I can safely say, growing up in Shetland, it was kind of known that some women had what we called the gift. And the gift was that you could almost feel other people's lives. You could always feel what they were going through, but you could also see what was coming at them or at yourself. And I think for the longest time in Shetland, they thought these women were mad, but there is that kind of acceptance level of there is people with these very unique gifts, and they're very much more accepted into the community now. Whereas before they were kind of like shunned and, don't have anything to do with them kind of thing. But yeah, it is something I grew up with. Like, my grandmother always knew what I was going to do before I did it. And sometimes she would just appear as I was having the idea of doing something I wasn't supposed to. And she'd be like, Crystal, what are you doing? And just like, she would just know that I was up to something. And I would look up at her and I would try my most innocent face that I could pull off. And I'd be like, nothing. And she would be like, get that idea out of your head and behave. Like, she would just know. Like, she always knew. And I always said, like, she was a great believer in ghosts as well. Like, she would talk to me all the time about, oh, the first ghost I ever saw was when I was 8. And I'd be like, wait, there's really ghosts in the world? Like, she totally changed my viewpoint on it.
Yeah, and sometimes I use that a little bit in my stories, but I guess I'm very acceptable to the fact in the real world. If someone, my sister is a Wiccan, and so we just White Witch. She just does her thing.
It takes all kinds. Like, everybody has their own perspective and their own look on things. And I mean, I've been friends with every possible walk of life that's ever existed. Whether my friend has been a wrestler or a Wiccan or a fisherman or worked in the army or the navy. I have literally met so many walks of life that nothing surprises me anymore. Like there's very little that surprises me. And I think the more you kind of get older, the more accepted you are of different people of different walks of life.
So my daughter does past life regression.
Oh wow!
With people, yes, with people. She's often asked me, did I think my characters were people who were real live people at one point?
Yeah.
I told her I didn't think so, but then again, they do come to me as a pair usually and tell me the story. I mean, I add to their story sometimes on, well, what would they do if they got into this situation? And because they're there, I know what they would do, what happened, what they said to one another, what they said to somebody else. So are they, am I channeling? I don't think so. But if I'm channeling a lot of different people.
I mean, it's not impossible.
They're real to me at the time. And I know when I'm done writing down their story isn't over. They're not done. I can tell you, like, okay, what is Callie doing now? Well, she's on her fourth child. She's still working with her rancher husband, and that's the kind of thing. They are real to me in that way, and
they live on. They live on.
Yeah, they live on, and if I looked around, I could maybe find Callie's great grandchildren, out in Kansas running around, or whatever.
Yeah, running around causing mayhem. Yeah. I love that. And I love the fact that we've been able to have you on today. So tell us, how do you balance your writing life and your normal life? What's your process?
Because the job I still have, I can do and fit in, and doesn't take up much time right now. I have to put together some contracts or some leases. So the rest of my time is my own. I do sit down with my husband from 7:00 till probably 1:00 in the morning watching television.
Yeah.
I do enjoy that. The rest of the time, I can get up and sit in front of the computer and I can write. And he disappears and he does his thing. We're both retired in the home. But he has some work that he still does, and then so we mostly have meals here at home. We don't go out a lot. That was emphasized by COVID.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
It sounds like you find the perfect balance, because you've got your time with your partner, but you've also got your time to write and time to enjoy all the fruits that comes with writing, all the enjoyment of the writing the stories and the excitement and the editing and all the parts that I think sometimes we all take for granted, which is the actual making of the story and then watching it take flight. I think that sounds like a perfect balance that you've created.
And my husband's been very supportive. I mean, I didn't really start writing books for publication until I was 65, but and we've always worked together as a couple all the way through our lives, no matter what we were doing. And he supports me in the sense that he tries to disappear. He says he gives me quiet time, and he has headphones that he'll volunteer to put headphones on if I want to continue writing. But I am so prolific, and I type fairly fast, and so I get it, a lot done. I put off usually one full book, maybe two. They're not as long. They're usually about 35 to 40,000 words, just
Yeah.
because that's what my publisher at the time wants. They
Yeah, of
don't
course. Yeah.
want they don't want the 60 and 80,000
Yeah.
words that other publishers do.
Which is good because I always feel like when you're doing 60 to 80,000, it's almost like you feel it's like a little bit too much for some stories and then it's like not enough for others. I always feel like it's hard to gauge where you're going to land in that kind of that word count, if you know what I mean. I always
Mm-hmm.
like prefer to see where the story just goes on its own.
Yeah, and the publisher I have now, the DSP, he would prefer me to do a second book if it's going to be
Yeah.
that long of a story.
Yeah.
Um, give them, and that's actually the size. I don't like to read much more than 50 or 60,000 a day words. So
Yeah.
I like to be able to pick up my book at noon and be done with it when it's time for me
Yeah, of
to make
course.
dinner.
Yeah.
And uh, rather than, some people will carry these very, very, very large tomes and around, and I would, I can keep it in my head, my stories.
I've been
I
one of those
often
that have
was,
slugged through them. Yeah.
I've, and I'll read more than one story at a time sometimes. But
Yeah, I do that
I
as well.
I prefer to start and end and go, oh, isn't that wonderful? Whatever, because I like happy ever after
Afters, yeah.
books and writers for the most part. So, uh, and there's enough other stuff in the world to bring you down. I think your reading should
Exactly.
raise you up because it's your
I think
time
that's what
to be happy.
yeah, and I think with romance is like I think everyone just thinks, oh, we create these couples and give them happily ever afters. But for the most part, romance writers, we try to create a world that you can escape into so that you can deal with all the depressive crap that's going on in our lives. Like it almost gives us permission to set aside the awfulness of the world and just have some fun for like a half an hour or however long it takes for you to read, however long you want to read. And I know that's the reason I got into romance was I wanted to give the hope of love and the perspective of different kinds of love to different people. Do I dabble in other genres now? Yes, I do. But I think that's because I'm so prolific. Like I just signed a contract a couple months ago to say that I would do one book a month for 3 years. I must be insane to sign that first and foremost. But I signed it because I was like, I have such a catalog of stuff that I want to get out there. And this place was taking this huge risk on me and my co-author to do it that I was like, okay, let's see how this goes. Let's see where we can take this. So yeah, I'm jumping into your kind of world in that regard where I'm going to try and put one out every month for the next 3 years.
That is an undertaking, only
Yes.
in the sense that about the time you do that, then your brain freezes on you and you go, what? No, I
Yep.
haven't had a brain freeze because if I'm not writing one story, it's because another one is interrupting it. And so you go, okay,
Yeah.
we'll put this one over here. I'll work on that tomorrow. All right, you know,
I do
what's
that
your
as well.
problem? What do you need me to have, put down? And so that I can get rid of the second couple for a while and
Yeah.
get their story down a little bit. I've got probably 50 works in progress, I call them, but really they're basically the title and a little bit about the story, whatever that is. And
Yeah.
I've got maybe 50 of them going. And and every once in a while, somebody will say something in my mind, and I go, "Oh, all right." So I have to find that work in progress, bring it down, and then say, "Okay, Brett says da 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 da," and then that's all maybe all I'll put on that book for 6 months. But he came, he
Yeah.
gave me a line or two of whatever, and then I file it back
Oh,
away.
I wish my work could work that way because in my head, if you were to walk inside my brain, it's like a forest just full of trees, and every path takes you somewhere else, like to a different story, to a different world. And my problem is if I'm working on one book and the characters that have decided from a different story they want to invade, I have to stop that book, take out my notebook for whatever book they've come from, and I have to make those notes. What happens, or what I hate happening, is when I totally know that I have to get that specific book done and I hit a wall because I didn't make enough notes. That I hate, because I'm usually a plotter, I'm usually a planner, I usually have thousands of notepads spread out over the house with this is what happens in this chapter, this is what happens in the next, so that I don't ever have that let's hit the brick wall and figure things out. Working with my co-author is so helpful, because if I do really hit the wall, I can turn to him and be like, so I hit the wall, help. Can you get me out of this? And usually he has like just this small idea that will allow me to slip through whatever it is that's blocking my way and let me continue on. And that's why
How much
sometimes I'm very grateful to have a co-author.
how much work does your co-author do? Is it a 50-50 or 25-75, or does it he just keep you going in the right
I would
direction and
say
you go off?
I would say I do 80% and he does 20, where if I've got a wrestling scene or if I've got a fight scene or I've got something that requires his expertise, he'll come in and he'll say, right, this is how it would work. And he would write it down for me. And then I would go in and I would just make it feel as if there was no transaction between me and him. So it flows through the whole story. So there's a lot of days he'll get a random text from me being like, okay, so this is where I'm at in the story and I need an answer to this dilemma, or what do you think our characters should do for this? So he's very good at being that kind of safety net and guide for that particular series. And I do feel for him, because I will just send him, I'll forget he doesn't know what I'm thinking or what I'm doing. So I'll just send him a message completely without context. And he has to sit there for like 10 minutes and be like, what was she asking me? And then he figures out where I'm at, and then he kind of writes back to me with an answer. Sometimes it takes a couple of days, sometimes it takes a week, but he always does come back to me and be like, oh, okay, I see where you're going with this. Okay, this is the answer to your question. So yeah, but he gets copies of all the chapters I write, and he reads them and then sends notes in, and I'll make adjustments, and it's a really good working relationship that we've ended up with. So
Just wondering.
yeah, no, it's good to share though. It's good to share like how we work, because it's totally different to how other writers co-write. And I think every writer has a different experience. Like I'm working with a different writer right now who's so hands-on compared to him, whereas he'll let me do my thing and then comes in and adds his stuff. Whereas this other person, I literally work side by side with. So we'll put in like 3-4 hours together just going through the thing that we're working on, page by page. And then I'll go off with him, and then I have to go work on something else. But it's taught me a lot about working with people, and it's also taught me how to trust in my own talent, how to be confident within myself and to not doubt myself, which I think we all have those moments as writers. Do you have those moments?
I'm a pantser, because I've always said I'm not really writing a story. You know, my characters are.
Yeah.
They have thrown me sometimes. They have, I'm pleasantly surprised with them a lot of times. I think they write better than I do, and so I give them their lead and just let them go on. There's times, like I say, when I question what they would do if this happened or if that happened, and but I don't try to steer it too much, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't lay a plot out, because unless I'm willing to alter it, because sometimes something comes in and you go, well, that one. I mean, I know I know my people from the beginning, so I know what they'll do. That's how I know there's a
Yeah.
happy ending at the. But
Yeah.
it is. There's sometimes, and they don't all of a sudden throw a hissy fit, or they don't all of a sudden, you know, abandon one another, like
Yeah.
they used to do in these books. Like, really, you were so mad at your love yesterday, but today because she, wore the wrong color umbrella, it's no,
You're done? Yeah.
there's no way you could live with her ever. It's, um, when there's too contrived, and I guess that's why I let my characters do it, because I don't want it to appear contrived.
Yeah, it's a really good way of working. So, well, thank you for coming on the show because I mean, an absolute pleasure. And you survived. You've done it. You've done the whole hour and a half. That, you know, it's not as painful as everyone thinks it's going to be. And we'll have to
You
have you
spend most of the
back.
time talking them into it.
Yeah, I do. It's like I'll get people that comes to me and says, "Oh, the podcast sounds really awesome and really fun." And then when it comes to the day that they come on, I always have somebody that freaks out. I always have somebody that sometimes I have people that no show 2 or 3 times because they're too nervous. And then they show up and they do it and they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize that it would actually be fun." So a lot of the time, yeah, there's a lot of hand holding usually that goes into this. But with you, I haven't had to do that at all. So thank you for making it so easy.
I always have time to talk. I always,
Yeah.
yeah, I love listening to your accent for one thing, and learning about the history. Um,
Yeah.
Boone Knight is going to end up into one of my books. I'll tell you that. I often
I would be
work with.
delighted to see that. Yes.
Yes, I've used similar things where the sister-in-laws have gotten together to give their maiden spinster sister by law of a little talking to and
Talking to, yep.
explaining,
Yep.
yeah, and explaining things, um, and that usually has come out well
Yep.
for the bride to be. But I didn't realize that there was actually a Boone Knight, and
Yeah.
that makes sense. The English always had the mother daughter talk the night before the wedding. It's like, really, you couldn't do it 1 hour earlier? No, it has to
Yeah.
be the night before the wedding. Boone Knight is the
I
same
think
thing.
they
It's
do
like
that so
you
you don't
can't
run
get out
away.
of it.
They did. Yeah, they
Yeah,
do it.
yeah. So you can't check it
Yeah.
out. You keep saying, that's going to happen. So
Well, I
yeah,
mean,
but
if you Google it, you'll see that they actually have a special meal that they make, and they have crocheting, and they have sewing, and they do a lot of stuff in that night. It's not just them sitting around drinking wine and talking. It's very much a hands-on night where this poor woman who can't sleep anyway because she's just about to get married is essentially put to work with her in-laws and her sisters and her family, and is given an education along the way, so to speak. And they do it as well. Like when they have the pregnancy, when they get their first kid, they'll have like they call it the watch. So like at the very beginning when they first get pregnant, they watch each other, and they kind of talk the woman through what she's to expect and help her when she's going through the rough first trimester, and it's good because it's women in Shetland were very supportive until the 1900s, and then it's not been as supportive, but it was very much like the women had to look out for each other because the men were away fishing and they were risking their lives constantly at sea. So anyone that was on the land was taking care of each other. So yeah, and I was fascinated by history because of that, because of the fact that if you grow up in Shetland, you grow up in a Viking community. So they tell the stories about the Vikings, they tell the tales, the old legends, and everything gets passed on. And yeah, it's even the Viking names are making a comeback in the islands. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. I would recommend having a look and see.
I will do that.
Well, thank you so much for
I re-
joining us. And guys, next week we've got a bestseller who's coming on to give us a little bit of a surprise. So you'll want to stay tuned for that. Until then, I will see you guys all next week. Be safe and don't shoot yourself.